Welcome along to the Whisky Stories podcast with myself, Graham Kildare. We are back in the Athletic Arms, and for all the concerned listeners who, we're very grateful for getting in touch, the messages, the emails, the comments on Instagram, please do not be alarmed. Angus is back. I have returned. He's back, and now at least somebody has done a little bit of research this week. But we are back in the Athletic Arms. We've got Ross Barr here. How are you doing, Ross?
Magic. Glad to be back in my favourite pub with some whiskies that I don't know, so we'll get onto that as well.
Happy days. We've got Angus, the head of research and whisky fan. How are you, Angus?
I'm absolutely brilliant. Yeah, Monday we're recording this on a Monday, which is a bit of an unusual one for us, but you know what? I couldn't be happier.
Just topping up. Just topping up for the weekend.
Topping up for the weekend.
What did you make of our performance without you, Angus? High praise indeed.
Like, I mean, 6 out of 10.
And the thing is, Angus is actually going to be slightly worried because his current fiancée has informed him that she's started listening to the podcast.
Oh.
That's right, yeah, she has.
Your current fiancée?
Well, that's how we
I've reborn to how I referred to her on the show.
But then I don't know where she is currently listening, where she is on the listening journey. So as she's listening to it might be former fiancé after some of the comments. But we are joined by, well, you know what, Ross, you wait 25 episodes for a global brand ambassador to come along, and then we get 2 in 2 weeks because we've got Stewart Dick here, who is the global brand ambassador for Torabhaig and Mossburn Distillers. Stuart, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Pleasure to be here with a banging pint of Guinness.
Yep.
That's always my judge of a boozer. So yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me along.
It's great to have you because you've not travelled down specifically for this podcast, which we'd like to say you have. But I believe you're down this neck of the woods doing a little bit of business, doing a little bit of work, getting the name out there.
Yeah, so I'm down for a couple of days in Edinburgh this week. I've got some bits and pieces tomorrow with the whisky shop, with the Black Cat, and with Royal Mile Whisky / Drinkmonger. Brilliant. And then the day after tomorrow, I'm in Glasgow. So just down for a couple of days, tastings and stuff.
Brilliant. And you're from, where is it you've travelled down from? Is it Granton and Spey, I believe? Yeah,
so I live in Granton and Spey. I've been living up in the Highlands for about 20 years. Heading on for 20 years.
Yeah, brilliant, fantastic.
Where are you from originally? I thought you were from Speyside, to be honest.
See, my accent gives nothing away. I'm always terrified to say this. I'm from Kilmacombe.
Those boys, so the Fifer and the East Lothian man have got excited. I've never heard of Kilmacombe.
Oh, you never seen the Tune the Fat sketches of Kilmacombe?
I don't think I have.
I suppose he is. He's a child, isn't he?
So tell me about Kilmacombe.
So the Tune the Fat sketches. There's one where there's a boy up in court, and they're about to pass sentence, and the judge says to the guy in the dock, "Is there anything you'd like to say before we pass sentence?" And he goes, "Yes. I'm from Kilmacombe." The judge and the fiscal confer, and then they go, "Well, you're free to go." You'll need to look. You'll need to search for them on YouTube.
That is my homework.
Tune the Fat, Kilmacombe, brilliant. Well, no, it's fantastic to have you here. And as I say, you've just recently become the global brand ambassador for Torabhaig Distillery and Mossburn Distillers as well. Is that right?
Yeah, just in the last month or so. So started as UK ambassador back in July 22, and then this year it's kind of evolved. Really, it wasn't something that was a kind of a definite thing. It was just things evolved. I started doing more bits and pieces overseas, and this year I've got a bunch of stuff overseas. So then, it became global brand ambassador.
And does that mean that as a global brand ambassador, that when you turn up abroad, you'll be picked up in a car with a little Scotland flag driving around? Is that how it works?
That would be nice. That would be very nice. But no. Most of the time it's trying to figure out the public transport system in whatever city I'm in, which is usually a bit of a challenge.
So 2 weeks in, where have you sort of been out and about? Is it mainly locally, or have you been?
I think 2 weeks in, the highlight is probably Oban. That's probably the furthest afield I've been in the last couple of weeks.
You got places lined up then?
So later on in the year, in a few weeks, I'm in Germany.
Nice.
I'm doing the Netherlands, Italy, Poland. Those are my kind of handful of countries that I'm doing this year.
Where about are you heading in Germany?
Germany, I'm doing Interwhiskey in Frankfurt. And I don't know where else I'll be. So the way that it works is that basically we give the time to the market, and they say this is where we want you to rock up. You fly in, they do drive you about and take you to different events and what have you. So it's not, because we're a little way out from them. I haven't got firm details on that yet.
That's exciting though.
Well.
I think Torabhaig is a distillery that I know about, but actually you two gentlemen are drinking a Torabhaig.
I'm drinking. We're both
evening.
right.
So, Angus, let's start with you. What are you drinking tonight?
So I've got the Torabhaig. No, I've already forgotten how to pronounce
He's
it.
been practicing
And
this.
I was practicing it as well. What was it? It ends in moin. What was the first word?
The new one is Crochnamonia.
Crochnamonia. That's
Yeah.
Welsh. You said it better than I
I
ever
think my
could.
granddad died or
You
something
think
like
I
that.
said it for
So I've got Crochnamonia, which I have actually had before in here. I think it only arrived in Diggers about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and when it did, I did have a taste of it.
So what does that? What does Crochnamonia mean?
So Crochnamonia means hill of peat.
Right.
So it's named after a wee hill, basically. It's like a little kind of mound over in Neudart. So straight across the Sound of Slate from Torabhaig.
So-
we can see it from the distillery.
On a clear day.
So on a clear day we can see it over at Neudart. So it's only been out that 5 or 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So this is chapter 3 in our Legacy series. So the Legacy series is our journey to the release of our 10-year-old.
Yeah.
So we're intending to release a 10-year-old in 2028, and the Legacy series, the idea behind it is that it's going to chart the evolution of the whiskey. So each chapter is going to be the next stage of that whiskey as it evolves, and what's really important for us is that the DNA of the whiskey will remain throughout them. So it's not, we think of it really more as the same whiskey that has developed, rather than being different whiskies.
It's an interesting thing. It's like you look at what we've talked about Holyrood Distillery and stuff like that, and we're looking at you've got Portleith in Edinburgh and you've got Bonington as well. But it's now very interesting and exciting to see the direction that new distilleries are trying to go in. Is it about trying to showcase being different, or is it about trying to showcase keeping a steady thorough line all the way through, so that there's a trademark flavour profile that you can get, and no one really knows what works best, and I suppose it works best for different whiskey drinkers as well.
So and it's interesting. It's something which I say quite a lot. I think this is a really exciting time for whiskey drinkers, because we've got, particularly because of all of the new wave distilleries that we've got. I think the really nice thing about that is that there's a whole bunch of us who are sort of 5, 6, 7 years old. I mean, yes, there's the kind of pioneers of that new wave in terms of Kilhoman and people like that who started sort of 20 years ago, something like that.
But Torabhaig originally was, it's been almost 20 years in the planning.
I mean, it's been a long time in the planning.
So
I think for all of those distilleries at that kind of age, it's interesting for drinkers to be able to see all the different approaches that we're taking. So whether it's a focus on this distillery character, which is what we are focused on, whether it's a focus on the cask influence and how different casks are going to impact your whiskey, whether it's a focus on essentially farm to bottle, with growing your own barley. I think it's such a cool time to be a whiskey drinker.
I think it's a really interesting approach to new distilleries. Torabhaig not only being a very affordable and reasonably priced whiskey for the new whiskey market, but if people are really, really into whiskey as well, and they haven't tried Torabhaig, this is your opportunity to kind of get on the bus early and actually see how single malt whiskey progresses. It's very rare that you get the opportunity to do that.
Nobody alive will be able to go, I remember when Spring Bank brought out.
From the inaugural release to the 10-year-old. I mean,
couldn't wait to see what their 10 and 15s are like or anything like that.
I think it's quite interesting because, for example, we tried one of your casks. So we tried your Glenallachie, and we tried it at 3 different years.
Yeah,
that's right.
And to somebody who's really, really into whiskey, that's so fascinating. I can totally nerd out on that as well. So the fact that you're going to get an established distillery releasing a product at an affordable price that will show you a clear progression, and obviously you're an island distillery, you're based on Skye, for people that don't know. there is a distinct, unique characteristic to the whisky as well, which also makes it a little bit challenging for some people that are new to whisky, which I think is quite exciting.
Well, what is the story of the distillery then, Torabhaig? So, I mean, talk us through what was the sort of, Angus has kind of alluded there to, the story goes back to 20 odd years ago, but what is the current story? What is the selling points of the distillery as well?
So it was essentially it was a dream really of Neil MacLeod Matheson, our whisky maker and MD of Mossburn. So Torabhaig is owned by Mossburn Distillers. So I will probably refer to them a little bit interchangeably as we go through. So Neil had this kind of dream. He wanted to build a distillery on Skye. He's a MacLeod. He's got family from Skye and Lewis. So he always wanted to go back and open a distillery there. So we've been around about 2010, 2011, 2012, there or thereabouts. This site became available. Right. And he managed to bring the board on board with him with his plan to take this old farmsteading and convert it into a distillery. But so the kind of 20-year thing goes back to about 2002 when planning permission was acquired for the site. Now that was actually a previous owner who then passed away in 2010. He was a family friend of Neil's, so that was kind of how he came to know that the site was available.
Right. Okay.
So we bought the site in 2013 and set about converting it. Now, as I say, it's a farmsteading, so it was essentially being used for cows not long before we took it over, before we bought the site. And I mean, if you go on the website, you'll see pictures of what it looked like when we bought it, and you'll see pictures of what it looks like now, and the transformation is quite incredible. Yeah. We had a stonemason on site every day for about 4 years to convert it. It's a stonemason's wet dream, the amount of
what
pointing.
A contract, is it?
That boy's done well.
But I mean, I've seen pictures of it, and it is aesthetically a really pleasing looking distillery. I mean, and I think in a place like Skye, dare I say it, it maybe has to be, because and the tourism in Skye in the last 10, 15 years, as you'll know, has just gone through the roof. And you've got a distillery visitor centre, and that must be a big part. Certainly in the early days of the distillery, that must be a big part of the. Must be a lot of focus in terms of the business on that side of things, getting people in through the doors, trying your whisky. Yeah. People that visit Skye, maybe not even into whisky, but that's maybe you could be. You're in a privileged position where for foreign tourists, you can be the kind of introduction to whisky as well.
Get out of the midges and into the distillery.
Exactly.
100%. I mean, I think so. The thing about, I mean, architecturally, Skye is pretty varied. I mean, you see houses going up which are incredibly modern. Yeah. Proper kind of stuff that could be on Grand Designs. The biggest challenge for us in that respect is the fact that the building is listed. Right. And I can never remember whether grade 1 or grade 3 is the highest, but I think whatever the highest
grade
is.
Grade 1's the highest.
Okay. So that's where we are. So we are extremely limited in what we could do. So that was one of the biggest challenges with converting that site into a distillery, is that we couldn't change a lot. So we added an extension, which is our mash house, and one of the things, for anybody who's watched an episode of Grand Designs where they take an old building, you'll know that it's this weird balance of the extension has to be in keeping, it has to be sympathetic, but it also has to be different enough. Yeah. So the extension, the roof line, the ridge line is all the same. And one of my favourite little features is we've mirrored, there's little slit windows in the original building that would have been there to give ventilation for the animals. We've mirrored those in the extension. And the nice thing about the fact that we've brought this building back to life, aside from just bringing the building back to life, is that it looks really planted. Right. It looks like it has been there for 200 years. Mm-hmm. It doesn't look like it was a distillery that opened just 6 years ago.
Yeah. People love that.
It's incredible.
Yeah,
and
because,
when people...
There are some distilleries that are, very kind of avant-garde, modern. You think of somewhere like Lindor's Abbey with the big glass and steel. Yeah. And you can say that that's clearly a distillery that's been built in the last 15 to 20 years.
I bet we can be quite bold and say sometimes it really lets it down. I went up to visit Clynleash, great whisky. maybe last summer, and it's right next to, it's in Brora, it's right next to the historic Brora Distillery, and Crownleash had a new refurb as part of the Four Corners, and it's got a big modern black box right now at the front of the distillery, and it just doesn't really fit in. To me, it's beautiful, I love the little balcony, but it doesn't fit in. You've also got to appease the locals in somewhere like Skye, where realistically, since 1830, Talisker has been the one and only word you discuss when talking about whiskey on the island. And that adds a lot of pressure.
Well, I remember hearing about when Alex Thompson was talking about Glen Turret, when Glen Turret changed from being the grouse experience, and he said that the first thing he used to get was locals would be moaning about that big stupid grouse that was as you were coming in, and then as soon as it was taken away, folks started complaining, going, why did you take that grouse away and stuff. And I think he said it was actually only there for 8 years or something like that, but it just became iconic. It became iconic. But I can imagine, like what Ross has said, is Talisker being on the island for so long. But I mean, it'd be interesting to know, and of course, I've often questioned and asked people similar positions as yourself, is there sharp elbows in the whiskey industry and stuff like that. But you look at like what we said with Scotch whisky experience and the Johnny Walker experience, is it's like it's helped each other, because now you've got people who maybe come to Skye on a holiday, as Angus has mentioned, not whiskey fans. They've maybe gone to the Talisker distillery because of the marketing and because of all that, and they've gone, oh, well, there's another distillery. I mean, how far apart are they?
I mean, we're probably like an hour and a half. I mean, we're not close by. But no, I mean, there is absolutely not sharp elbows. It's and it's amazing. You know, you often we'll get folk coming up to us at festivals and saying, "Oh, Talisker, how do you guys get on?" And we get on great. I mean, one of the first tours, one of the first people I hosted for a tour at the distillery was Talisker's brand ambassador. So you know, we get on really well. I mean, everybody in whiskey is just into whiskey.
And I think one big collaboration.
We're just waiting for one guest to go, I'll tell you. Let me tell you about these guys. Let me tell you about that one.
And I think, you know, one of the things that's nice now, particularly, is that Skye is now a destination for whiskey tourism.
True.
Before you had Talisker, and it was a long way to go for one distillery. Whereas now there's 3 of us that you can visit. So you can visit us, you can visit Talisker, and you can go across to Rassie. So you've now got essentially, you know, 2-3 days worth of whiskey tourism that you can do on Skye. And I think you're absolutely right about, you know, it brings new people to whiskey. So there's a few of the bars that run a flight with those 3 whiskies. So it's a really nice way for people to access it. And actually 3 whiskies which are different enough but have some commonality, all being from the islands, that, you know, people are going to find their kind of flavour in that, which is great.
Brilliant. And that's almost like, you know, from a tourism point of view, that could be the difference between someone spending 1 day or 3 days on the island. That could be the difference between people coming to Scotland for 1 week or 2 weeks.
It could be the difference between a hotel being able to stay in business for the year on a remote island and not being able to. I mean, for the local economies, for a new distillery to pop up, I mean, they're rubbing their hands together. It's absolutely, it's so exciting for them as well. But you still have to have that kind of, there is a pressure, there is a prestige, especially in somewhere like that where it is remote. If somebody travels an hour from Talisker to Torabhaig, you know, you need to be good, which is why it's worked it.
Well, you're saying travels an hour, but what happens if you get stuck behind 4 German campervans that
I mean, to be honest, the 4 German campervans is probably is kind of the best case scenario.
The roads are old on Skye.
When did they build it? What was it? The bypass on Skye was something that was going to get built. It was questioned.
I was on Skye last week and I got stuck. I got stuck at Slugachan, which, for anybody who doesn't know Skye, is kind of probably 3/4 of the way between the bridge, probably more than that actually, between the bridge and Portree. It's kind of the junction where one way you go to Portree, the other way you go across to Talisker and up to Dunvegan. But then south from there is one road. And I was on Skye, I had colleagues with me, and we'd been up in Portree, we were heading south, and we got stopped near Sconser. And there was some roadworks there, and we thought, it's just the roadworks. And we then found out that the road was closed. There'd been an accident. And the road was closed for about 5 hours. So we ended up spending 3 hours at Sligachen. So we went to the hotel, we had our tea, and we sat and had a couple of drinks. And so that's why I say that the German campervans. I mean, or campervans, other nationalities are available. You know, so it's.
See you in Frankfurt.
It's one of the. It's one of the challenges with working on Skye actually is that it's, you know, it is so much tourism. The level of tourism on Skye is mind-boggling. You know, and you know, you said about, you know, kind of rubbing your hands when a new distillery opens, and actually that aspect of it was something that was really important to us when we opened the distillery. So, you know, Neil had the dream of opening a distillery on Skye, but there was then other aspects that played into it. So, you know, he had an idea of the whiskey, and I'll come back to kind of what we aim for with the whiskey. But one of the things that was really important was that it supported the local economy, it supported the local community. So when we set out to hire our distillers, we made a point of hiring people who lived locally.
5 minutes away.
But more than so, and I always make a point of saying lived locally, because having moved from the Central Belt to the Highlands, unless my family are there 10 generations, I'm not local, and we've got some folk who had moved there, but everybody was living locally. So, you know, we wanted people who essentially already had roots in the community. But more than that, we wanted people who had no experience in whiskey making. So we hired 9 brewer distillers. It's amazing. 9 brewer distillers who had never had any experience. The closest to somebody with experience in the whiskey industry was Iona, our youngest distiller. She had been a tour guide at Talisker. She was the only one of the distillers who had worked in the industry at all. Now, we could have hired a bunch of graduates from Heriot Watt, and this is not me throwing shade in any way against that. And they'd have come in, and things probably would have gone faster. We could have got through our R&D phase quicker, probably. But a couple of years in, chances are a bunch of them would have moved on.
This is true.
So what we've got is we created essentially these jobs which are secure, good-paying jobs, and, you know, say for a couple of people who aren't part of the team anymore, but for very good reasons, we've got the same team since we started. And so for these guys, you know, our hope is that they will be there for years to come.
And this is very similar to the Isle of Harris distillery, did the exact same thing, and they have people almost flocking back to Harris, guys that have moved down to Edinburgh, to Glasgow, to have careers down there, and because of their hiring policy, very similar to what you're talking about, it's bringing people back to these kind of communities that for years, for centuries, had been losing people. I actually did a bit of research, visited your Wikipedia page, which I don't do everyone that visits. One other member of your team was a goat, your mascot, Goatee. Is he still with us?
No, Goatee is gone. I did wonder where you were going there. I was wondering where that was going. And actually, to be honest, it took me a moment there when you said a member of your team was a goat. I was like, what? So we had a couple of goats. There was 2 goats. There was Goatee, and there was another goat. I don't know what the other goat's name was, but one of them died. So we replaced that goat with another goat, and then the new goat was beating up Goatee. So both goats got rehomed. And I've now said the word goat so many times that it has lost all meaning in my mind.
So if I went up to Torabhaig today, I wouldn't find any goats there.
You wouldn't find goats. We do have chickens. We've got chickens. Chickens. But no, the goats are gone. And I think so that's an interesting function of the way that we hired, and the way that our distillers work. So they're instrumental in everything. So it's not just that they just work there. They're not people who just kind of, you know, rock up for work and then leave at the end of their shift. They've been involved in creating what we have there. So, you know, the reason that we had goats, the reason that we have chickens, the reason that we have a couple of beehives is that a distiller went, can we have? Can we do? Can we get? So whilst we hired people who didn't know what they were doing in terms of making whiskey, they brought in a whole host of other skills and interests. So Iona, in the early days, did a lot of our social media. Dougie, who's now our operations manager, he'd worked offshore for years. So when something broke, Dougie could kind of bodge it back together to get it running until we could get the replacement. Myra is our beekeeper, and she's a horticulturalist. So she kind of takes charge of all of our landscaping, all of our gardens. So everything that's done there, all of the planting. I mean, yeah, they could have got away with just cutting the grass, because that's part of what they do is they maintain the grounds. And they could all have just gone, we're just going to cut the grass, and that'll kind of be it, and we'll keep it clean and tidy. But they then started planting it up and everything. It's just all of these things, and everybody takes an incredible pride in the place. I mean, when I first started, it was speaking to my boss before I started. I spent I think about 5 straight weeks on Skye. So I was back and forth every weekend as part of my training to begin with. So first week I was in with the visitor centre to essentially learn the story, the tour, what have you. And then I spent a week with the distillers just to learn all about our process. And before I went, my boss said, it's really nice, there's a great feel to the place, and it's like a family. And there's always that element when somebody says that, you go, very good. But it is. Yeah. They are. I mean, the team, because they've all been part of it, and this goes for pretty much everybody. So not just the distillers, but the visitor centre team, the cafe team. They've all been there since we opened, pretty much. So they're a really close-knit team, and they really care about everything that happens there. And you do feel it. And I think one of the best kind of examples for me of their involvement in everything was the first day I was there with the distillers. They ended up spending about 40 minutes talking about how they were going to upgrade the water filtration to bring our water in from the cooling pond, so that they could make sure they filtered out, all of the frogs and everything else that would be in the cooling pond. Now, I don't think any distillery you would find the distillers sitting chatting about that and going, well, if we use these filters, if we use those filters, that would be a production manager's job. It'd be the distillery manager, but these guys are, intricately involved in everything, including our equipment, including our plant, which I think is incredible.
Well, just to bring it back to the chickens, do they get fed the draft?
No. The draft goes to the farmer next door. So the steading that the distillery is in was this farmer's cowshed, essentially. So there's a new, big modern cowshed been built up the hill. So if you're going to Skye, if you're going to Torabhaig, as you're driving down from Broadford, you'll pass a big cowshed just before you come to the distillery.
Lots of cows just sort of
half cut,
just stoating about.
Just stoating about. Are we staggering about the field?
Yeah. So our draft goes to the farmer, and again, it's another one of those situations where you've got a really nice symbiotic relationship where we work with the farmer. So one of the recent developments is we built a warehouse on Skye, just down the hill from the distillery, right down by the sea. And so all of our casks are filled elsewhere. So the casks get delivered back, but it's down a pretty big slope. So the first time we got some casks delivered, 4 trucks arrived full of casks. First guy drove down.
Was that another danger on the roads of Skye? You might get stuck behind a
getting stuck behind a tanker or a gas lorry. Just getting stuck behind stuff on Skye is a constant danger. Yeah. So first driver tipped his load, then couldn't get back up the hill. The other 3 drivers were standing at the top of the hill laughing at him because he had no weight in his axles. Next driver feeling gallus, down he goes. He gets rid of his load, and again he gets stuck. So they now refuse to go all the way down to the warehouse. They park on the road, and we have to use our tractor and the farmer with his tractor to reverse down with 1 cask at a time. Jesus. So again, that's one of those examples where we've got this cooperation. We phone them up and say, we've got some casks coming next week. Can you come and give us a hand? And it's the most labour-intensive way to bring in casks. I was there when they brought some casks in earlier, the beginning of last year. So snowing, unusually. Well, not so unusually when I was there last year. I almost got barred because I kept bringing the snow. Coming down, reversing with a cask on the forks, 1 cask at a time. Fortunately, it's a small warehouse and it's just about full now.
And so how many? So you're keeping a good amount of casks on the island then?
So the warehouse will hold around about 1,000 casks in total. So it's not a huge warehouse.
Like unique projects or maybe some interesting things.
So yeah, so there's some interesting and unusual stuff in there, and those are typically they're part of a parcel that the rest of which will be elsewhere in Scotland. So one of the things we're going to get to see is what difference it actually makes. We've all heard that it makes a difference at being matured by the sea, and what difference does it make? So we take a pretty geeky and scientific approach to everything, which I love. I love the kind of nerdiness that we go into. So it's something which I'm looking forward to seeing what answer we come up with in 5-10 years time. And to my mind, I think there will be a difference.
Right.
I don't think it's going to be salty. No. Quite simply because salt molecules are too big, they can't pass through the wood. But I think, so we've got casks in Speyside, we've got casks in the Central Belt. And although technically the whole of Scotland has a maritime climate, the climate on Skye and the climate in the Central Belt and Speyside is different. So it's a dunnage warehouse, so it is humid, it's cool. I mean, it is metres literally from the sea. We had to build the ground up by about 6 foot. Really? Just to make sure a big high spring tide wouldn't flood the warehouse. So it is properly at sea level.
Wow. I think just for people that don't know about, because some people do put lots of marketing into different cask breeding in different areas and so on and so forth. But people that don't know Torabhaig, you're drinking a Torabhaig and so is Graham. What is the character of Torabhaig? Yeah. That'd be, I think, just for people that might not know the distillery,
Because what should I be tasting as I hold my glass in front of me now?
So you're also on the Crochnamonia.
Yes, I've also got a Crochnamonia.
I'm on the other one.
Graham, what are you on? You're
on an Old Glown.
Yes, that's one.
Which is Legacy Series 2, is it?
So Old Glown is Chapter 2 of the Legacy Series.
Nice and light.
And
very pale,
Crochnamonia is Chapter 3 of the Legacy Series.
I'll let you go.
So I think going back to the kind of start, what we set out to produce was a whiskey that we describe as elegantly rugged. That's our description of Skye, and we took that as our inspiration. So we wanted a spirit that was very clean, very delicate, very light, but we also knew that we wanted to produce a peated whiskey. We're an island distillery after all, so we knew we wanted peat. But we also wanted to produce our own interpretation of heavily peated. So that was something that took us a while to really kind of dial in, and Neil had this vision for the spirit for the whiskey that he wanted to create. It took us 12 to 18 months to really dial the process in. Working with a variety of yeasts, a variety of fermentation times and temperatures, messing about with different cut points. So we run long fermentations, about 90 hours. We run our stills really slow, but the crucial thing with creating the flavour profile that we've got is the way we run our cut points. So during the second distillation, we cut very high.
Right.
By doing
some people might not have been. So you, obviously we'll go into another thing you've done in whiskey with your tours and stuff, but explain what the different cuts will do for.
So during you get your two distillations. First distillation.
90 hours is a long time for fermentation.
Yeah, it's a long fermentation.
So a lot of people are like 50, 60 hours. So 90 hours is a really long time, which will give you maybe a slightly fruitier style.
Yeah, so 50 is kind of basically your minimum. Anything over that is considered a long fermentation. You've got distilleries that are up at the 150 hours, so that's a very long fermentation. So for us, we're at 90, so that it allows more fruity esters, more fruity flavours to develop in the wash, which helps contribute to the flavour. During the first distillation, the wash distillation, we run the stills really slow, which is very important because by running the still slow, you get lots of reflux.
So you're burning, you're sort of creating slower condensation. You're not turning the heat up, cranking it up. It's like, is that a slow to medium cooker? Or is it right? Okay.
So essentially,
and in terms of the cut, someone once described to me, I think this is the best analogy. You have the head and the tails, and then you have the heart. And someone said, think of it as a fish. If you're cutting a fish, you cut off the tail, you cut off the head, and then you fillet it.
Yeah.
So the tails are right at the very end of the distilling process.
Yeah.
The head's right at the beginning. So at a certain point, you choose to cut the head. At a certain point, you choose to cut the tail, and you're left with the fillet in the middle.
Yeah. And we think about it as kind of sculpting it. So, you know...
Sounds better than just gutting a fish.
Well, I thought it was a good analogy.
No, the fish analogy is great. It's
I
funny.
thought it was good, Angus.
Whenever I find myself talking about cut points, I go back to my tour guide days, and I end up, you know, going the head and tapping my head, the heart tapping my heart, and then doing a kind of little tail impression. I just can't not do it. But yeah, so first distillation, slow distillation, loads of copper contact. Second distillation, it's those 3 cut points. And where you take those cuts is going to have an influence on...
Whether you go blind or not.
In large part, aye. So the heads cut, that's the bit that would have made folk go blind in the old days.
Yeah.
So we cut very high. So we have just a 15-minute foreshot, which is a very short foreshot or heads cut. And then we cut to tails at about 64%. Right. So, I mean, broadly speaking, most of your liquid is, actually from your distillation, is not being used. You're just taking this wee bit from it.
And does that leave a sort of, am I right in saying now, does that leave a sort of lighter, crispier liquid instead? If you leave it longer, is it not more oilier and things like that you're usually getting?
Yeah, absolutely. You get oilier, you get bigger, you get heavier flavours. But for us, it's about the peaty flavours.
Right.
So, if you guys want to grab your drams and give them a wee nose, and tell me what you're getting.
Now, I'm terrible at this.
I'm useless as well. I mean, this
Whiskey.
is where we claim
People
we're whiskey
just
novices
say
again.
there's
No wrong stuff.
There's no wrong answer.
Absolutely. Like I say, just
So,
like...
So are you guys peat heads typically?
So
I am. I really love my peated whiskey.
Okay.
I'm a big fan. Graham.
I thought this would be quite a challenge for
Graham
you.
and Ross.
I'm enjoying it, but it's not my go-to like that flavour profile.
This is right up my street. I have to say, this is. You know, I really do love a smoky.
So quite a light spirit. So probably, I mean, I'm not nosing
Not
it, but probably quite fresh.
That's
with a little bit of that kind of ashy smoke in the back. So this is a new one. I'm trying to add.
But
Actually, it's quite dirty. I actually quite like that nose.
There is.
It is unapologetic peat smoke, but it's not medicinal. It's not iodine. It's not TCP. It's not Ardbeg. It's not Lafroig.
And not actually.
That's precisely what we were aiming for, or precisely what we wanted to avoid.
And actually, even on the nose, I didn't get a lot of smoke.
Yeah.
Is that?
So
that's
we wanted to, basically what we wanted to do was we wanted a whiskey that would be kind of ashy bonfire smoke, gunflint, fireworks.
Yep.
We didn't want searingly medicinal. This is where our interpretation of heavily peated comes in, because this is more heavily peated than the majority of Lagavulins, Lafroigs and Ardbegs.
In your kind of PPM scale.
Yeah. So this is where we get super nerdy, is in the PPMs. So we are...
Which stands for what, sorry?
So it stands for phenol parts per million. Well, it would be phenol PP... Phenol parts per million.
Parts per million for
parts per million
phenols.
for phenols. And that's basically your measure of how peaty it is. So we start with heavily peated barley. So for the one that you've got for the Old Glown, that was 77 ppm. And for Angus, yours is 78 ppm.
That's really high.
It's high.
Quite high,
It's
isn't it?
properly high.
That's high. That's more than Lafroig and
I'll be
Ardbeg.
perfectly honest with you, right? So I mean, bearing in mind it's Monday, late afternoon, early evening. So first whiskey of the week. Week starts Monday. But you know, that's the first dram I'm going for, and it's not not the dram I would normally go for. So the first 2 or 3 sips out of that, my taste buds were going a bit like, what the fuck are you doing?
And so on paper, I would say that it's quite an intimidating thing to read. So that kind of level of PPM is very high.
On the 3rd or 4th sip of that, I'm getting a lot more smoothness.
And this is where the kind of sculpting thing comes in, and this is why the sculpting is for us is a kind of a better analogy, because essentially, you know, if you think about starting with a big block of stone, and you essentially throw away the bits you don't want, and that reveals your sculpture. So we start with 77 ppm. We end up, in the case of Old Glown, at 17 ppm.
When it comes out of the cask.
Aye.
Yeah.
So we start very, very high, and we end up relatively low. Now, by doing that, we're able to shape the specific flavours that we want.
Yeah.
So, in simple terms, we collect guaiacols, which are the...
That's you keeping it simple.
Yeah, this is me keeping it simple. This is me keeping it simple. So, the kind of phenol flavour compounds that give you the flavours in whiskey are, broadly speaking, your guayacols and your creosols. Guayacols give you ashy bonfire smoke, gunflint, fireworks. They give you, broadly speaking, Jura, Highland Park and Kuboken. Creosols, on the other hand, give you TCP, plasters and antiseptics. So they give you Lagavulin and Lafroig and Ardbeg.
Right.
Guayacols are collected early in the run. Creosols are collected later in the run. So by taking that early cut point, we get loads and loads of guayacols.
Okay.
And so this was one of the things that we set out to do. We wanted to create a heavily peated whiskey that doesn't taste the way people expect a heavily peated whiskey to taste. Because I think, what happens in whiskey is you get folk who, I don't like peat. Because all the peaty whiskies they've tried have been heavily medicinal. And that is either a taste that people don't like or it's an acquired taste.
Well, I think it's interesting that there isn't just one peated taste, if you know what I mean. So it's because to the untrained palate, myself being included, until you just explained that to me, they're not just, for me, I just knew that there was a smokiness, and then you're thinking of the scale of smokiness, and you're going, that's a wee bit smoky. And then you go further up the scale and go, that's really, really smoky. And that, as far as I'm concerned, was what it was. But as you've said, the difference in that is the gunflint and the...
And then over time as well, as Torabhaig gets older, the peat will also dissipate on the palate. And what you'll find, and I think it's something that will be interesting, we probably have the same opinion, where the peat comes from is also massively important. A mainland peat, if you're taking your peat from Aberdeenshire, you've got to look at how... what was Aberdeenshire like 200 years ago? Was it dense forest lands? Is that what we're now getting from the peat? Islay was underwater for 10,000 years. There's a chance that the peat that you're getting there is old seaweed and fish and salty, and it makes sense that different locations produce a different style, and their mud. Fundamentally, their mud, their peat has different properties that will influence the smoke in the whiskey all the way down the line.
I mean, is this it now? Am I finally evolving into the next level of what Cody Reynolds explained? Am I breaking into it?
You're certainly taking baby steps.
Well, look,
when I was listening to the Cody episode and the fact that Ross had warned you about Cody being nerdy, and knowing I was coming on this, I was thinking, okay, I need to not get too nerdy.
I think the glycol chat, I'm going to be honest with you, I've been making these boys down quite lightly for the last 6 months, and I'm going to have to explain a lot after this. But
you're going to have to hold their hands quite a bit.
But it's been good. I think it is interesting because what you're trying now is a young spirit that's filled at a very high ppm but doesn't present in that way on the palate. Angus, you're a big Lafroig and Ardbeg fan as well. How do you find this?
I would clarify that by saying I'm a big fan of peated whiskey, not necessarily like you mentioned. I'm not a big fan of that TCP taste. I probably prefer something like a Colila where it just got that kind of real charcoal. But my present fiance, she loves the TCP taste. She loves it. There's a cocktail called a penicillin. She loves that taste. She's all
to me, that's a good way to ruin a sour, if you ask me. That's
exactly. But that said, I don't. Do you know what? I've kind of grown to like the TCP taste. Initially, I have to admit, maybe 2 or 3 years ago when I was trying that kind of Lafroigs and stuff, I was a bit I like Ardbeg, but maybe Lafroig's a bit too much on the TCP. But now
how do you find this in the palate? How do you find the ABV? Quite easy drinking, or
very. I mean, for me, I'm probably more than Graham. I can kind of handle my ABVs a wee bit more.
There you go. He's got more hairs on his chest than I.
A few more hairs on the chest. So no, I mean you can. I don't mean it disparagingly, but you can. I do sense it's younger whiskey there, but that's not. That's
That's something to be excited about.
That's something to be excited about. And actually, I really enjoy it. Really.
Did you guys both have a wee taste of each other's?
No.
Okay, so
over and see what you think.
I suggest you do because so as I said, this is the Legacy series is about the evolution. It's about the journey. So when Ross mentioned about getting on the bus early, that's exactly how we think about it. It's you're not buying a bottle, you're buying a ticket on this journey. And so the Alt Glown has evolved into Crochnamonia.
Yeah, you can definitely sense a sort of next
when
level
when
of that.
Neil, our whiskey
I like
maker,
that,
set
that's
out
nice.
to create Crochnamonia, he started off with Old Glown.
Yeah.
So that is so what you've got, Angus, is 92% the same whiskey.
Right.
So we took essentially Old Glown and we added 8% sherry matured liquid.
Oh, there you go.
Which I think
That's
is
a
something
sherry
which
tap.
is, and it's surprising. One of the things that surprises
It's
a lot of
amazing
people.
how little percentage can make such a big difference,
Yeah.
I would say.
It's incredible. It's gone so far, that 8%.
And I don't imagine that's a huge vatting of casks. I mean, what kind of production are you doing at Torabhaig? What are you aiming
So
for?
our capacity is 600,000 litres.
Okay.
We're producing between 400,000 and 500,000 at the moment. So
Which isn't big.
we're more or less maxed out,
There's
but no,
lots
it's
of
not huge.
artisanal distilleries now who make very, very little whiskey.
Yeah.
But if you're making less than a million litres a year, you're not a big distillery. Your production's not massive. Is that 5 days a week?
So
Or that is your capacity,
That-
7 days a week?
that 600 would be our absolute theoretical max. So
One set of stills, 2 sets of stills?
one pair of stills.
Yeah.
So we run, for most of the year, we run 2 mashes a day, Monday to Friday.
Nice.
And then 1 mash a day, Saturday, Sunday.
Quite different. Yeah, that's
And one of a part of the reason for that is, you'll have experienced this yourself, Ross. You go and do a distillery tour on a Saturday and Sunday, and there's nothing happening.
You
know-
want something actually happening.
You know, if you're lucky, there's some fermentation that's a wee bit active, but by the time you get there late Sunday afternoon, there's nothing even bubbling. So that's part of why we do it that way. So this would have been a vatting, I'm guesstimating, of probably about 30 casks.
Right, okay.
In that kind of range.
that's small.
Yeah,
That-
yeah,
that-
it's
I mean,
but that's amazing.
Yeah.
So that's a vatting of. If we're big fans of William Grant's, we talk about
Still waiting on the free t-shirts.
So Balvenie 12, they might be using 8% sherry casks. So we know that they're double maturing, but actually that would be hundreds and hundreds of casks. That would be a much bigger operation, maybe thousands of casks. But really interesting. I feel like if people want to learn about Torabhaig as well, you're great on the socials as well.
Well, that's
One of the
what
things
I want to talk to you about as well, because we've talked a lot about Torabhaig, but one of the things is I did a little bit of research myself. Now, you and I, we've had similar interests. You used to be a DJ, a disc jockey, I believe, which...
wow, that's a deep cut. that's a proper deep cut.
Well, I wasn't sure if Angus was going to make it tonight, so I just I mean, right, so talk
Even the head of research didn't dive that deep.
Well, I want to know a little bit about, we've talked about Torabhaig, but you've obviously worked at, you've mentioned about, you've worked at Tomatin, you've mentioned about the fact that you've worked in distillery tours and stuff like that. So, what is your journey into whiskey? What brought you into whiskey?
Let's rewind it.
Was there whiskey in the house growing up?
There was whiskey in the house. I was not. I mean, I didn't like it at the time. Growing up, I was not. We weren't really a whiskey house. So I mean, my old man has
Martinis at dinner time in Kilmacoe.
exactly. My old man's collected whiskey for years, but he was a collector rather than a drinker. And it was a semi kind of investment sort of collection. The kind of real whiskey drinker was my uncle, and he's a White and Mackay man. So that was the whiskey that we had in the house, and it was the whiskey that I tried when I was definitely already 18 by the time I tried it, and so I didn't enjoy it at the time, but no, my journey to whiskey and my journey into this job has been all over the shop. So I was a mobile DJ.
What was your company called just there? Did you have a name? Or
It never got that far.
See, we were Party Animals Limited, music for all occasions.
That was
Jesus. I can see it.
The mobile disco world's a bit of a rogues gallery, Graham, isn't it?
I bet there's not many people that went to your school that
Party Animals Limited, music for all occasions, and we did all occasions. Once did a funeral.
Wow, fair play.
Wow, pick the playlist for that one.
It was great. Anyway, so you were...
that was when I was at school, really. I think I had aspirations of being Pete Tong. That was kind of where I thought I was going, and did hospitality management at uni, and then left uni and ran a pub up in Fintorn for about just under 3 years.
Yeah.
So that was when I moved up to the Highlands. Sold the pub in 2017, and then I started a wholesale paper and office supplies business, which is a complete left turn. But
You were Michael Scott.
yeah, exactly. That was the industry that my old man had been in, so it was kind of, I had connections. We also did that. My wife and I took over a card shop. So we had a card shop in Granthams Bay for 10 years. So that was kind of the main thing for 10 years. And
So you went from paper to card.
Exactly. We graduated. It's the evolution. So it's been all about journeys. And
Your CV's really good, but I bet it's got a lovely letterhead above it.
it's on very good quality paper. So we had a card shop. We had a post office in the card shop.
You didn't have the Horizon system, did you?
We did have the Horizon system.
Right, I guess that's why
you managed to get your
enough of this.
got scot-free.
The less said about that, the better.
I can't give our man you'll be missing for next week's podcast.
No, we can't have him missing because this is the most he's ever spoken in the podcast.
This is true. But you end up at arguably my favourite distillery.
So yeah, and even ending up at Tomatin, that ending up in Whisky really was kind of by chance. And it's kind of as a result of the post office, really. So one of the local hotels manager came in once a week to do his banking. Local country house hotel, they had about 100 whiskies on the bar, and one Friday he was in and he said, "Oh, we're short staffed this weekend, we've got a couple of events on, it's a bit of a nightmare." And I said, "Well, I'll come and do a bar shift for you." And I had kind of forgotten how it pulls you back in.
Yeah.
So I'm just waiting for the point when Ross gets pulled back in, because it'll happen.
This is his release.
Drug.
This is his release. Talking about, well, you've said that plenty of times.
The reason that I really enjoy the podcast because I miss talking about whiskey.
Yeah.
I just day to day talking about drams.
Yeah.
So 100% I get it.
So I did a couple of shifts. By the end of the weekend, I was on the rota. And because I remembered how much I loved it.
I always kind of wondered this about you, Stuart, because we'll get into down the line with your socials. Is I remember when I first came across you, you were somebody who was talking about taking malt whiskey, making cocktails.
Yeah.
And I was like, because I knew you were working at Tomatin Distillery,
yeah.
I thought, well, that's very forward thinking for somebody working at a fundamentally traditional distillery.
Yeah.
It makes sense that you ran the hotel and you loved the hospitality side of it, because it's all people, isn't it?
It's a well-trodden path. I mean, the more people that we get in from the industry, the more people you actually start to see this sort of, a lot of it is, first of all, hospitality, and there's got to be a
100%.
passion there for selling a product that is uniquely Scottish and that we're all very, very proud of. So there's always that element there, and then it is a lot of the time into the bar trade or through the hospitality industry that gets you into that sort of whiskey stage, and then the next step seems to be into the whiskey industry.
Yeah, so I mean, and it's interesting. It's something that a couple of folk that have been on here before me have said something kind of similar. So I started trying to learn more about whiskey so I could do a better job of helping the customers, and that was what really gave me the passion, because I started learning about the science of it, I started learning about the history of it. Now, I don't have a background in either of those things, but I started to get interested in it, and that was the point at which I decided, actually, this is what I want to do. So I'd been there for about a year, kind of part-time. I was just doing a couple of shifts a week, and I started applying for jobs in the whiskey industry, and I kind of realised that going from doing a couple of shifts a week in a bar to being a BA was just not a leap that was possible. So I started applying for tour guide jobs.
Right.
And I was lucky enough to land one at Tomatin. So I worked at Tomatin for 3 years. Started off as a tour guide, and then became a team leader, so essentially a supervisor. And I was there all through COVID. And it was COVID that kind of got the social stuff. That's where the social media stuff came from.
Dramdabbler.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Let's talk about that then.
This is how I first came across you.
yeah,
So yeah, it makes sense because I met you on this before we got early into the Tomatin conversation, and it's during lockdown, and I'm a sad whiskey guy, and all my data's being collected on my phone, and so I'm on TikTok, and whoever it is,
The Chinese government must just be like, what's the point of watching it?
whoever it is thought that it was destined for me and Stuart to know each other.
Yeah.
And so it was probably like 10, 11 at night, and these TikToks come up. There's a guy talking about why people should be drinking monkey shoulder and stop turning your nose up at blended whiskey.
Right.
Keep in mind, I've been working in 5-star whiskey, or been working for Diageo, and actually I was like,
This guy's wrong.
no. Angus will go missing next week. I was thinking, this is really refreshing, and also, how have I not come across this guy before? And again, it took a while. I was probably watching you, and I was joining your lives, and you and your wife were talking about drams and what you liked, what you didn't like, and answering questions from people from all corners of the globe. I was probably watching you for a few weeks, if not months, before I found out you worked in Tomatin, which at the time, Tomatin, we all know I'm a spoiled arse in whiskey, but some of the best whiskey I've ever tasted is from Tomatin.
I think
it's Scott Adamson.
some amazing juice.
Oh,
amazing.
Fraser Souness talked about, I think that was one of
The
his.
36, Tomatin 36 is,
Yeah.
will never leave my top 3 ever.
Really?
I don't think anybody can convince me of that. I could have my top 1 and 2 change, but I'll make room for Tomatin 36. It absolutely is a dram that changed the way I looked at whiskey because of the profile of the whiskey. Obviously that's ridiculous, and actually I hear the 30-year-old's better this year, but that's still a stupid thing to say out loud. I had the Tomatin 18 2 nights ago for the first time in a long time. Great dram. The 14 Portwood, the best value Portwood whiskey you'll get on the market. And I come across, you work at Tomatin. Not the prettiest distillery.
No.
No offence. I mean, I know
I mean, the
not on you, Fiona. You guys, you were great.
the company. I mean, Tomatin don't claim it to be.
No.
It's it's.
For people that don't know it, it's community and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so Tomatin is. It was at one time the biggest distillery in Scotland.
In the 1980s, what
yeah,
long ago,
In
right?
terms of production.
So Tomatin was producing, I think it was 12.5 million litres. So, I mean, even by today's
Which is bonkers.
standards,
Macallan currently produce 12.5 million litres.
Yeah.
They have a 50 million capacity. Macallan currently produce 12.5 million litres.
And that's what Tomatin were doing.
In the
yeah,
80s.
Tomatin were doing in the 80s. I mean, it was
How many million litres to Rose Isle?
insane.
Rose Isle might do about 10 to 15, but they're not a single. Well, they only produce malt whiskey. Although they've done one special release at the end actually.
And
it's a very different operation.
Glenfiddich
you can't visit them.
Glenfiddich's capacity, I think, now is about 20 million with a new still house.
Glenfiddich and Glenlivet, I think.
And Glenlivet,
both
they're both
21
around
now,
that kind of 2021. So, I mean, even by today's numbers, Tomatin producing 12 million back in those days was bonkers. And
Is Tomatin still up there though? And production's dropped that since then.
production's dropped significantly. So, I mean, it's had a bit of a turbulent history, I think is the easiest way to describe it. So, with bankruptcies, changes of ownership. So it went bust in the 80s, and that was the point at which the Japanese owners took full control of it, or they took full possession of it, essentially, full ownership. And capacity at that point dropped to about 5 million. And when I left, they were producing about 2 million.
Right. Okay.
And I think they were talking about upping that gradually. But I mean, so it's a distillery that had developed organically over the years. So if you do the tour at Tomatin, it's a wee bit of a rabbit warren. So you're kind of in and out and back and forth, and it's kind of easy that there's a certain point where you pop back out somewhere, and folk on the tour go, "Oh, how did we get back here?"
Yeah.
Because they haven't realised you've gone up a stair, round in a circle, and back down and back through a different door, and they're like, "How did we get back here?"
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, as a result of a lot of growth in the 60s, 70s, 80s, it was not built to be aesthetically pleasing. And so, I mean, it's an honest distillery. That's the thing about Tomatin. And so, so I was there 3 years, and the social media stuff came along during lockdown. So it was a weird one. I mean, I started in the first lockdown, right, I think even probably like the second week of lockdown.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a bit like you just said, Ross. I wasn't talking to people. I had nobody to talk to about whiskey, so I started off doing cocktails. So on a Friday night, I did a lockdown cocktail. That was on Insta. You can go back and find those videos if you want to see terrible lighting and sound. And just, it was a learning process.
I wish that at that stage.
And so then I wasn't on TikTok at that point. And I think, like everybody, during lockdown, I downloaded TikTok.
Yeah.
And then ended up spending far too much time on it. And realised that there's no whiskey content on here. And I thought there's a market for it. So in the run up to Christmas, I decided to do essentially an advent calendar, just using my own drams. I hadn't bought one. So it was 24 drams at Christmas. And partway through December, it just went ballistic.
Yeah.
One random, and the weirdest thing was it was a random throwaway video. So I would do the daily reviews, and then people would post questions in the comments, and I would do video responses to them. And this guy said, there was a comment, he said, I'm Scottish and I don't like whiskey, sorry. So I did a video response to him, and I was like, don't be sorry, you've just not found the right one.
Yeah.
And I use an analogy that I picked up from the Whiskey Tribe guys, which is using your coffee order to get your whiskey. So it gives you an idea of your palate. So it was kind of, if you like a latte, you'll like this. If you like an espresso, you'll like this.
I at the work coffee machine, I get an espresso and then a latte because it fits in a mug, but also it means it's. So what kind of whiskey would I like if I like an espresso?
That's what it's like on a Monday.
And a latte.
Normally we get on a Thursday when he's had a full weekend.
Oh my goodness.
You like a bit of sherry and a wee bit of peat.
There you go. It's done it in one.
So if you like an espresso, then if you say you're an espresso drinker, I would be giving you more into kind of heavy peat, probably bourbon. When you bring in lattes and cappuccinos, you want something a bit richer. So your degrees of sherriedness. If you're an iced coffee drinker, then you're going to go straight bourbon, unpeated, probably Speyside. Broadly speaking. So that was, and I just kind of sat there in my kitchen and went, if you like this, you'd like this. Pulling bottles off the shelf.
Brilliant.
You're incredibly consistent as well. You're consistent in the way that you kind of gave everybody their answer and their time. That people were generally saying, well, I don't like this, or I don't like that. Or, I'm from Scotland and I drink Jack Daniels and Coke. And the answer was, that's great.
Yeah.
You're so close to drinking Scottish whiskey.
Yeah.
Why not try a monkey and Coke? And and I think there was something that was very honest about that, which is probably why, you won't maybe not say it, but for people that don't know, and they can follow you on TikTok, you're currently at 54,000 followers.
Yeah.
Which is insane. It's
amazing.
Mad.
It is mad.
And that was before becoming a global brand ambassador.
Yeah.
Like, people need to take this into account. It's not being an exciting new distillery and Skye that's helped you out.
Yeah.
It's a platform that you built up yourself in a really unusual circumstance.
She's Gen Z's on TikTok.
Watching
whiskey
absolutely.
content.
Yeah, that's me.
But cocktails. So I then started throwing in cocktails, it was, for me, it was about bringing a different audience to whiskey, because the younger audience is really underserved, I think, and you see it at festivals. You look at the age demographic. People are still stuck in it's their granddad's drink.
Yeah.
And I get it. It's how they've seen it for years.
100%.
And I think there are more and more brands that are taking the approach of, do you know what? If you want to stick Coke in it, if you want to stick it in a cocktail, it's fine. Do what you like with it. My view is it's your whiskey. You've paid for it. Do what you like with it. Even if it's not necessarily to somebody else's taste, it's your whiskey. Yeah. And I think that's the thing that so many people got stuck on. And as Ross said, Monkey Shoulder was my go-to. It was the one that everybody who went, I don't like whiskey. That was the whiskey I was recommending to everybody. And it was because for me it strikes the right balance between price for somebody who's new to whiskey. So they're not going to want to spend a lot of money on that bottle in case they don't like it. It's approachable, but it also, this is going to sound weird, it tastes like other whiskies. Mm-hmm. So there are whiskies out there that are probably lighter and might be a little bit easier for somebody who's new to whiskey. But if you give somebody a Jameson to try and get them into whiskey, when they then switch to Scotch, they're going to go, hang on a minute, there's a hell of a lot more flavour here. This is a bigger flavour.
Yeah.
So that was always my kind of gateway whiskey that I recommended.
I think what it shows, and I know we've jumped back and forth a little bit, but what it shows is despite working for a brand and developing a new brand, you are just a whiskey person. You love whiskey. I mean, even what you've got in front of you now, you came in, you'd seen on the Instagram at Kev, so you got yourself an Ardbeg, I believe, was it?
Yeah, it was the Ardbeg Smoke Trails. It's one I've seen it a couple of times and fancied trying it.
And that's what it's all about. So and then I picture another dram that would be completely opposite to you.
Okay.
And because I know you're going to like that.
Okay.
And so it essentially comes down to being really into whiskey, showing enthusiasm, being quite authentic at Tomatin Distillery, where you're able to shout about the authenticity of the distillery anyway. I mean, I think they store all the casks on site, they've got a cooper on site, it's loads of stuff that people would never realise. It's quite significant.
It also comes back to, again, it's like we suddenly, we're now well into the sort of mid-20 episodes here with over 23, 24 guests that we've had on. And it's like the consistency in so many of the stories was the fact that you're another person who's come into this podcast who took an opportunity through a really, really bad time for not just the industry but for everybody. I mean, you look at like how many people have we had on here who Cody Reynolds set up a lot of stuff during lockdown. You had Kev from Diggers. If it wasn't for Kev, Kev started drinking whiskey during lockdown, which is what got him into it, which is why there's over 800 bottles behind him.
Even Big Cam and his pals going and doing the dram drops.
Yeah.
And it was more social. It got people drinking, it got people talking about whiskey.
We were talking about Alex Thompson was talking about what I think the industry really had to move fast, and I think look, we all know COVID-19 was a horrible, horrible time for so many people, and in the drinks and hospitality industry particularly, it was a very, very bad. We're still absolutely feeling the knock-on effect of that. However, I think if it wasn't for people like yourself and other people who, instead of just sitting there, you did now. Whether or not it was out of trying to just keep yourself sane and talking to somebody, or whether it was a planned thing where someone said, well, look, we can do whiskey tastings through online and stuff like that. It probably has benefited the industry massively in one sense of the fact that TikTok, for example, might not have been on the industry's radar.
And benefited...
Probably still wouldn't be.
I totally agree. And benefited individuals. We all share a common hobby. It's why we're here on a Monday night. Yeah. And so there might be somebody who was trying to get a bit into whiskey, then COVID happened, didn't happen, somebody's come up and is able to join a live and speak to Stewart for the first time. You make friends in the whiskey industry from all over the world.
There was an economic argument behind it as well, where a lot of people found they had a lot of disposable income, and bagging it on a premium bottle of whiskey was absolutely the thing that they could suddenly do that they hadn't been able to do before, and that also was a gateway for a lot of people.
100%,
as well.
100%. I mean, I think that the drinks industry as an industry saw a kind of benefit from that, because that's exactly what folk were doing. They were going, okay, we're not going for our night out, so look at what we're not spending. Okay, we'll buy a 60, 70, 80, 100 quid bottle of whiskey. And what you just said, Ross, I've got a group of friends that now came out of my TikTok. So you mentioned my wife. So back in, I used to do a live every Saturday night on TikTok. And my wife was kind of like Mina from Still Game. She was always behind the camera.
I like that.
So she would randomly, and this was our Saturday night thing, because we couldn't go out. So we would go on TikTok live and we'd sit and chat to folk, and it was also for the folk who were at home who couldn't go out. So that was kind of the thinking.
You were like hosting us in a way, and then your wife would read you what people were commenting, and you could answer the questions. So from that, we've got this little group of friends. We call it our Dram Fam, and there were folk who were joining every week. I then did a Zoom tasting with them, and we've had a group chat that's been going now for 3 years with folk from all over the UK.
Brilliant.
All a completely diverse group of backgrounds, jobs. We would never have met, let alone become friends, if it hadn't been for whiskey. Which I think is exactly what you say. It's an amazing thing that brings folk together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the things I should mention as well, as we mentioned it last week on the show as well, is we're now publishing and being able to promote the podcast through the Whisky Club on Facebook, and you see these clubs and you see these Facebook pages, you see these groups and stuff like that, and they are great communities that you can go on, and the Whisky Club is a great way to sort of share what you've been drinking, or you can see what other people are drinking. They do set like wee special things and stuff like that, and the guys there are welcoming us to be able to promote the podcast and give people updates on that, and it's great. You see the numbers, and of course the amount of people from around the world and everything like that are all interacting together. And I think that's one thing, is when you talk about like the whisky community, you look at the whisky community as we see it in Scotland only as such, but you're a global brand ambassador now. You've only been to Oban.
Only been as far as Oban, that's it.
But you will when you start to travel to Germany and the places. You'll see that the spread of the community. You've seen it as a tour guide as well, with people actually coming here. But when you think about the percentage of people that are actually lucky enough to travel to Scotland who are whisky fans, but then when you go abroad and you actually immerse yourself in amongst those people in Germany and further afield over in Asia, and even likes of here in South America is not a place I would have thought whisky will have been a
big
drink
thing,
popular.
Yeah.
But then
Danny Dyer.
So Africa, he's talking about over in Africa.
Kenya. It's a massive market. I think it's something that a lot of people, if they don't know, you already should know. What they'll take from this is, of course, you're going to go and you're going to tell everybody about Torabhaig and why they should get on the bus, and talk about the new brand and how exciting it is. And Mossburn Distillers is an independent bottler, because you're such an enthusiast for different whiskies as well. It might not necessarily always be Torabhaig, but what you're going to do is you're going to interest a lot of people into Scotch whisky.
And that to me is what it's all about. I mean, I think for every brand ambassador, yes, your job is to sell your brand. That's what you're paid to do. But I think, and this is why there isn't the whole sharp elbows thing in the industry, because I think for most, if not all, whisky businesses, the view is that, okay, you're not drinking our brand today, but at some point you will. And so that if we can bring more people to whisky as a whole, then it's going to bring them to our brand, to whoever's brand it is eventually. I think, for folk who come to Scotland, one of my favourite things when doing tours at Tomatin, and again, Ross, you'll have seen this at Scotch, is when I would have a tour with a really diverse group of people on it. So you'd have a couple of folk from India, a couple of folk from Japan, a couple of folk from South America, and you'd be doing the tasting, and then a bunch of Brits as well. And one of the people from one of the far-flung places would say, "Oh, it tastes like," and they would come away with something that those of us in the UK would be like, "What?" They would come away with some tasting note that makes absolutely no sense to us. But because it's a taste and a smell that is super recognisable to them, it works. And you'll have seen it with customers coming into Scotch. They it tastes just like this, and you're like, aye, okay. Yeah. I have no idea what that tastes like.
100%.
And from your, was it straight from Tomatin Distillery into Torabhaig and working for Mossburn? From Tomatin, I started looking for BA jobs. Nice. I mean, the BA job is my dream job. That is what I wanted to do. That was kind of when I decided I wanted to work in the whisky. It's like, that's what I want to do. How far do you think you're off a quake?
I was wondering how long it would take for you to bring that up in this episode.
I think we can all say we're very proud of him that he managed to hold it up for that long.
I know the next question is you looking for any sponsors? You want to
I think it's really interesting having got the experience in the distilleries to now represent a new distillery. Obviously, it's quite a different approach from both of them. But the independent bottling side of what you do as well, I think I would love.
Well, Mossburn Distillers, I want to know.
I was going to say,
tell us what you've been reading up on.
I was going to say, when Ross mentioned representing Mossburn, a distillery in the singular, Mossburn actually have two distilleries.
We do.
So, Reeves Distillery, very, very interesting. Something Ross and I myself, Graham as well, had never heard of before. So when we think of grain distilleries in Scotland, we think of
it's not.
We think of maybe the North British Distillery, just a kind of stone's throw from here. We think of maybe Strathclyde in Glasgow. You've got Girvan. These are big industrial complexes. If you were a layman and you were looking at them from the outside and you didn't know about whiskey, it could be a cement
Factories,
factory. And these are owned these are generally owned by the big, Chivas Brothers, Edrington,
We spoke about the numbers of these malt distilleries. Cameron Bridge is 105 million litres a year.
So Rivas Distillery, as I understand it, is it's a very, very small scale production in Galashiels of all places. Producing grain whiskey. What's the future intentions of what you want to do at that distillery? Where is the whiskey going, and when will we see some of it? Is really and also what's the future hold for that the Rivas distillery?
That distillery, I think, came about kind of almost. It wasn't, I suppose, entirely planned that we would have that distillery as it currently is. So some time ago we had this plan that we wanted to build a distillery, and this was kind of back sort of pre-Torabhaig days, early Torabhaig days, and we knew we wanted a distillery that was not somewhere where there was tons of other distilleries. So it was never going to be a space out. So at we were thinking, well, the Borders is a great place because it's not massively saturated with distilleries. Great transport links. So that was part of it. So we have a.
Yeah, I think you're just a 2-minute walk from Tweed Bank. Railway station. Yeah.
We have a site south of Jedburgh, on which we've got planning permission to build some big warehouses, a bigger version of the grain distillery. And ultimately the plan includes a single malt distillery there. Right. Now this is a 20-30 year plan. So we will soon, if we haven't already, be breaking ground on the warehouses. The warehouses are the first thing because at the moment the vast majority of our casks were renting space from other people. So that's the first stage in the plan. But we needed a site for a bottling line. So we have this site in Tweed Bank. So that's where we do all of our bottling and our blending. And we have this experimental grain distillery. So it is a single pot column, so it's a hybrid still. So it's a still that we couldn't legally produce single malt on, even if we wanted to, because it's one of these weird things. Because you have the functionality to produce what is essentially a grain whiskey, the SWA are like, well, you could, so you can't call it single malt. And so what we're doing there is we've been producing rye whiskey,
right,
and we've also been producing Geneva. So the distillery is called the Reivers, so it's named after the Border Reivers. So
the failed rugby team.
Well, the precursor to that, essentially, the original Border Reivers were essentially sort of like a precursor to the mafia. These were guys who they
rustle cattle.
They marauded the border region, and essentially what they would do is they'd go south of the border and they'd nick a farmer's cows. So then they'd take the cows back north of the border, flog them to another farmer, then they'd nick them back from him, take them south of the border and sell them back to the original guy. It was a great scam, a really great scam. And these guys kind of marauded the borders for years, and actually back in those days before the Union of the Crowns, it suited both kings because nobody would really cross the borders. They essentially functioned almost like as a border patrol because nobody would risk running into these guys who were going to nick their horse. As the Union of the Crown came and they wanted rid of them, so they got shot at them. So it's that's where the name came from. And we're kind of taking that spirit in that we are essentially borrowing recipes that we're using for the rye and for the Geneva. I'm never quite sure how to pronounce that one. Anyway, and this again is where nerdiness comes in for us. So our master distiller down there, Alan Philp, is currently studying for a PhD in brewing and distilling that we have fronted him for, and his area of study is distilling with all grains.
He'll become the whiskey doctor.
Aye, essentially. And it's so he is now, as I say, he's now our master distiller. He's involved in the blending, so he works alongside Neil in the blending process of all of our whiskies. And So yeah, it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, it's exciting.
We haven't got a timeline of when we're going to release that liquid, but
I did see something about potentially an 8-year-old at some point.
okay.
Or...
I mean, I'm starting to. It's being so internally. It's being talked about a little bit more. So I mean, I'm not even. I haven't even heard any kind of ballparks on when it might be, but we are talking about it more, and we're starting to talk about, okay, we need to start thinking about talking about this.
Yeah.
So
it's a bit of a trend in Scotch whiskies generally.
Yeah.
More Scottish ryes and more.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we
even get grain whiskies that are now 100% malt. It's just a style of still they use, etc. etc.
So it's not a million miles away. As I say, I don't have a timeline on it, but and I think the capacity there is probably around about 100,000 litres. So it's small. It's a small distillery.
Wow.
But the plan is that we will build a bigger version of that at the site down at Jedburgh. I think probably at Jedburgh, the part of it that's probably a bigger question mark is the single malt distillery. Whether we end up doing that, because we already have one.
Yeah.
And if we do it, what size is it? So the plans are for something big. But so the warehouses will happen.
So is it a case of getting a plan for something big and then go down as you see fit, or rather than going for something small in the planning and then
But it's just such early days that you're sure.
I think it's just a case of, I think we kind of went, what are all the things we want to do?
Yeah.
We had this. I mean, it's a big site, and that's one of the. For me, it would be incredible for having all of those things on the one site. I mean, as a whiskey nerd, getting to go to a distillery or a site that has the single malt distillery and experimental grain distillery, and hang out there. I mean, it's like a true malt distillery.
And warehouses.
Warehouses.
Come on.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's a combined Scottish malt and grain distillery on the same
apart from
site.
Loch Lomond, that's probably it.
Potentially,
Yeah, I mean, there's nowhere else that's got a site.
Garvan make Ailsa Bay, but it's not. It's that's a grey line. They're different buildings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, sorry, there you go.
So I mean, so Reavers is a really interesting project. A company that's doing lots of interesting stuff. It's a really interesting one. One of the things that I'm kind of looking forward to seeing is whether we do a journeyman's dram with Alan. So one of the things that we're doing on Skye at Torabhaig is our journeyman's drams. So all of our distillers get to pick absolutely everything about their journeyman's dram.
That's fun.
Yeah,
so they pick the strain of barley, strain of yeast, whether it's peated or unpeated. So I'd be interested to see whether Alan gets a chance to do something really weird and out there.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I never heard of it. I imagine most of our listeners haven't heard of it. So something really different,
Yeah. Well, I mean, moving on then, we talked about big grain distilleries. So I've got a couple of. I've brought some whiskies with me tonight.
So
I've been waiting all day for this.
So for context, there's kind of a few maybe unreleased episodes and stuff that we've done previously. We had a big chat.
Well, I'll tell you,
talking about auctions.
Simon Smith is to blame, right? Because Simon Smith sat here and he talked about how he loves finding old whiskies, particularly blends, on the auctions.
And then the next day, famously, you bought a Ballantine's 70s and 80s.
Yeah, for no more than £75 for 2 bottles.
Yeah.
Right. When you're drinking that, bear in mind, Ballantine's 12. Right.
From the 19... the personal connection. I think it's important.
But Ballantine's 12, bottled in the 1970s. If that was bottled in 1972, then it was put into casks 12 years prior to that.
Yeah. And which is, Graham?
I wasn't expecting this to be a maths podcast.
But if you have a distillate from 1960 it's cool.
Yeah.
So with that in terms of whiskey heritage, it's great.
Two bottles that I've purchased. Now, I have to say...
So we were having a chat in the auctions the other night, and I'm saying, right, Graham said, we ought to buy something, and I got outbid on some really silly things that I'm really glad I got outbid for.
I have to admit, I've never used the auctions before. It's not where I buy whiskey, but I did have a look because we mentioned it about, and I did find there was a Suntory 1972 Winter Olympic blend.
See, that's rogue enough to be really interesting.
That was going, I think they bid at that point was about 40 quid, and I really wish I'd dived in there.
Well,
but-
Graham told me, we'll all just split up so you're not bidding the same thing. So I'll take the blend. I said, you'll take the blend, will you? So that means that Graham was bidding on the one thing on auctions that's a reasonable value and quite interesting.
Well,
great, I'll do the malts.
Well, the thing is, I was actually, so the problem you've got with these auctions, for people who don't use the auctions, is the fact that with this particular auction site that we use,
It goes on all night.
yeah, so basically the whole auction stays live.
It's
until
really who can
2 or
stay
3
awake the longest.
2 or 3 minutes.
So what happens is it finishes at 7,
Yeah.
and until there's absolutely no bids on any auction on any of the lots for 2 minutes solidly, then it'll finish. So it goes for 5 or 6 hours.
So I went to my bed. I went to my bed with 6 whiskies ready, right? And I'm thinking, no one's going to want these, right? £200 was my sort of limit. That's what
and
it was.
previously you've tried this.
Yeah, and I've gone the other way where I've gone to my bed and suddenly realised, bloody hell, if I get all of these, I'm going to be out of pocket quite considerably.
You were, you know?
I was. But so this time I was very careful because it says chuck another £5 in, but then you forget that the bid's already gone up a £5.
Yeah.
So you're basically going £10 up. Anyway, long story short, here's the first bottle that I have. Right. Gentlemen, this is a 1970s Hague Dimple.
A dimple.
Wow.
From, I got another Fife blend.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so we're going to crack this open. We've got
you
some
ready?
bottles here. Kev has confirmed it's okay.
Yeah.
Have a wee look at that.
Let's have a little look around
I've
this.
got a personal affiliation with Dimple.
Yes.
You know, we spoke a lot at Glenkinchie about this being the corner of Johnny Walker. Actually, that'll be chock full of Glenkinchie.
Glenkinchie and Linkwood.
And for our American audience, this is what you would call pinch.
A dimple, and dimple pinch, made famous in popular culture by who would order a dimple pinch in a very, very popular Netflix series.
Go on.
Heisenberg.
Eisenberg.
Oh, really?
From Breaking Bad, he would order
Very
a dimple
good.
pinch. So-
Well, so yeah, you've got an old bottle here. It was famous for this kind of netting that came around the bottle.
and also, I believe
Can I-
if you actually look at the front of it, you'll see that I think the label has actually come off.
And
Oh,
so you said this is 1970s.
So it's a 1970s.
Architect's been in poor nick.
Aye, that's not
This
been
is
well
what we
looked
take care
after.
of. Gluck it, it's open.
Crack it open,
Right.
mate. Crack it open.
Nice
think
little
that's-
screw cap for any of our ASMR.
Oh, there you go.
That's good. You know, it's one of these things, it's a wee bit of liquid history. It's quite fun to share out.
Pour a couple of
You've
these.
got an empty there
Yeah,
as well.
let's pass it round.
There we go. That's
One for me, please.
Look
Thank
at
you
that.
very
Take the man
much.
at the bar.
There we go. So that's I think that's a 50. Is it 50 CL? A wee 50 CL there.
It looks total.
It's a small
It
one.
does, it looks tiny.
When I hold up to the next one, which you're about to see.
I've
now.
been warned about the next one, so I need.
So here's the thing. So you never. It is interesting when you're bidding and stuff, and we spoke a lot of shit. I don't know how, where you buy your whiskey from, but this year, if you want something interesting, you don't want to spend a lot of money.
Yeah.
It is actually a good year, I think, so far to bid on the auction. Don't price yourself out. But
Now another
it's-
thing about that is that Mark Inch is where he and that building is now no longer there. When you're driving, when you go on the train up to St Andrews from Edinburgh or going further north to Aberdeen, Dundee, you'll go through Mark Inch. Famously on the left-hand side, as you're going up north, you'll see this massive Hague building, which is now no longer there. So a real big part of Scotch whisky heritage has gone. Because if you actually look at the label, Ross, you'll see how long Hagues had been making whiskey.
since 1627,
Aye.
which I don't
Long
entirely
before.
believe. It just goes to show that marketing departments are still a thing in the 70s.
Anyway,
Yeah, Talisker were making whiskey in 1488. Aye, so they were. What I'll say, gentlemen, is-
long before David Beckham, anyway.
a smell of this. I mean, the nose is quite active. It's
Yeah.
This is probably bottled 40%.
That is, yeah.
It's unlikely to be 40%.
I was gonna say, what's left, Ross?
as we're drinking it.
Lovely that, eh?
But it smells way juicier than I thought it would.
Yeah.
Now, if you could just pass that bottle back, right, and just plonk it down there, because I'm now going to show you the next bottle. Now, there was a bit of a mistake I made when I bought this.
A clerical error.
And in a twist of fate, we've actually got more whiskey than we bargained for, was because I was kind of going through thinking, right, and I got outbid on something which was quite a heavy liability for my outcome. And I thought, well, that's fine, I'm not going to put another bid on that. It's 5 to 7. I'm going to find another one, and I found this particular bottle, and I'd heard so many stories about this particular whiskey. I thought,
So have you had this before? This whiskey?
never, and I've tried it. I have opened this one and tried this one just briefly, and I just quick bid because I saw the price. It was sitting at something like £23. Right, when it arrived, what I hadn't realised was I'd actually ordered 1.75 litres of this. And when you see the size of this monster,
What is it? Old Smuggler.
that is 1.75 litres of Old Smuggler.
When that turned up at your house.
That turned up, so I guess if you hold that up, put it beside your head so we can actually see the size of that.
Now, I have never heard of Old Smuggler.
You never heard of Old Smuggler?
Stuart, you ever heard of Old Smuggler?
No, never heard of Old
interesting-
Are
Smuggler.
you sure you've heard of
I've heard of Old Smuggler loads because now there's a particular family member, I can't remember who, I think it was my granddad. Now, I don't know the connection here, but
You reckon your family's in there?
Hiram Walker had owned Old Smuggler for a while, and Hiram Walker at the same time owned Ballantine's whiskey. So that was one of the things. So basically, I'm pretty sure it was for export market only. This bottle has come from the US.
It's from the US.
You
It's
can
got the
see
US tax.
And so my understanding is because this doesn't fit in your allotted whiskey
Well,
space
so
at
basically, the wife back at home at our plant, and she said, "Where the hell are we putting that? Because the cupboard's already looking pretty big."
It's also
busy."
not-
and I tried to put it. in the cupboard. Doesn't work. Now, what we have done with this bottle? Look at the size of it.
It's even awkward to pass it around.
It's huge, it's massive. It's the kind of bottle that you can comfortably put 50 pences in there.
Oh, aye. Yeah, that is becoming your change bottle.
Well,
once
no,
it's done.
because actually what's happened is, now, we've been coming to Diggers for a long time, and we've been, and Kev's been great. Now, Kev was in earlier on, I had a wee chat with him. I said, listen, I've got no place to put this bottle, so I'm happy to donate it to your collection.
Hold your mic.
So the Whisky Stories podcast is now officially, it's got a wee pourer in.
Oh, it's one of those stupid pourers. Oh, you can buy 1.75 litres of whiskey, but you can't pour it too quick.
I know.
Oh, God forbid.
It's fantastic. Right, pour a dram of that.
So what's Kev pricing that up at?
Basically,
Pound a dram if it's Kev's
I
prices.
don't know whether Kev can actually count this as more than one bottle on his collection now, but whatever it is, it's now going to be added to the Athletic Arts Diggers. Ross's hand doesn't even make it all the way around the neck.
Right, Graham, how long do you think it'll take for the Diggers for this to be sold out of the Diggers?
Well, the good thing is, I don't even think Kev should risk sticking that on his new bridge, because I think it would probably break it.
I would. Right, let's pass this round.
2 hands.
Yeah, sorry, I went for the shaft of the bottle. It's quite something.
It's girthy.
So how much did you end up winning it for in the
I
end?
think it's £24 or something.
Well, I've got to say,
£24 for 1.75 litres of
I
whiskey.
mean, I think legally in Scotland that's an issue. Actually, for being honest like that.
I was going to say, it's Old Smuggler, it's living up to its name, Graham, exactly.
I believe Old Smuggler.
I
Do you
poured
remember? Do you remember?
Oh, it doesn't smell terrible.
It'll be
It
nice.
smells kind of pink.
Honestly, it doesn't smell terrible.
It's kind of like almost a Lenore.
Do you remember when that person found all the smuggled bottles in the house in America? Do you remember when they ripped up?
fabric softener.
Yeah.
Did you just say fabric softener? Fabric softener.
This is so much.
Look at the size of it.
Okay.
We're going to be uploading these onto our Instagram, which is the Whisky Stories pod. At the Whisky Stories podcast, I think that's what it is. And basically, you'll be able to see the size here. But we've got a little enlarged tasting today. When you see the two of them beside each other, absolutely fantastic. But so can you guys remember when the American family found?
A great texture.
When the American family found old bottles.
It was Prohibition era bottles that
That was
under
Old
the
Smuggler that they
floorboards.
found in there.
Okay.
Right.
Old Smuggler's got a great history there, but Hiram Walker used to own Old Smuggler.
Well,
And
the good news is that the pinch is actually delicious.
The pinch is lovely.
The pinch is actually very nice. The Old Smuggler is a unique experience.
You're gonna get a photo of the two of them.
Do you not like it? Because we've got loads.
I have to admit, I prefer the pinch myself.
Yeah. Sure, what would you make with this Old Smuggler? Is there something
I could go back.
You know, genuinely, that fabric softener note I really love. I mean, the first thing I said to you was that it smells pink. I do have this tendency to use colours as a tasting note, which
there could be an optimistic slight biscuitiness about it, but I think it's mostly dust.
I mean, yeah, most of that smell has dissipated now into nothing. To be fair,
It's very soft. It's very just easy and brisk.
Whereas honestly, see if you could stick your nose back in your dimple. It is juicy. It's really interesting.
Yeah, the dimple.
So thank you for bringing that along.
What I'd like to know
that
is,
was good.
how would you smuggle that anyway?
Kind of like tomato plant flavour.
You'd have to be wearing a
It's
kilt
real
grip.
vegetable.
It weighs a ton as well. So
It smells green.
Yeah, it's lovely. That dimple's beautiful.
So there you go. There is the first venture for the Whisky Stories podcast into the auctions.
So a sporadic auction bottle will probably pop up throughout the episodes, but
all I can say now is I'm really disappointed I didn't get that 1972 Suntory.
Well, some of the stuff I was looking at. I mean, as you said, there was a Springback 10 out there. I think went for an absolute steal.
Yeah.
Really?
And also there was a Dewars from the 1960s, which again, and it was one of these ones where, as I've said, I've been on other auction sites where I think it's just if it's your lot, your own bid doesn't get bid on for maybe 5 minutes,
Yeah.
then you win it.
Yeah.
Whereas the fact is, I've been there myself where maybe I've stumbled across the auction finishes in an hour. I finished an hour ago, but it's still live because people are still bidding, actively bidding. And as I say, I woke up the other morning there and I was pleased in one sense because I saved myself a fortune.
Yeah.
But disappointed a wee bit because some of the drams that I was wanting. But I'm glad the dimple definitely is.
it's delicious.
The dimple's a winner.
So these drams, I mean, that was the 70s bottling. You've opened it now. You can keep it in your back bar for the next however long, and it's always going to be a conversation point.
Yeah. I mean, even like keeping
And that's
the bottle
that's
afterwards.
the point. It's about sharing it with the right people.
Yeah.
It's about having that conversation. It's about having a laugh at stuff like this Old Smuggler. I mean,
Oh, hey, Christ, look at that. 1.75 litres, eh?
Auctions, they really are often a great place to buy drinkers.
Yeah.
I mean, I bought some kind of keepers and I also bought some drinkers. I mean, that was first time I had Kilcairn. I bought it at auction before all of the Springbanks went ballistic.
Yeah.
I think I paid like 25 quid.
Yeah.
So you can pick up some great deals at retail or less than retail.
Well, considering like Simple is no longer available and Hague's is no longer there, Old Smuggler,
And it's
the Whisky
like-
Stories podcast.
Well, the Whisky Stories the Whisky Stories podcast brought to you by Old Smuggler.
Old Smuggler. But listen, it's a bit of fun. But like I say, we've still easily got well over 1.25 litres of whiskey to get through. And I don't know what Kev's going to price it up, but I tell you what, if you want to come in, if you listen to this and you're in the Edinburgh area and you're visiting Edinburgh and you want to see how much of the Old Smuggler, or just the size of the bottle, then pop into the Athletic Arms and have a little look at that because it's quite something, eh?
If you pop into Athletic Arms and you say you listen to the Whisky Stories podcast, if you want an Old Smuggler, I'll allow one per person and stick it onto Ross's tab and I'll buy you an Old Smuggler.
That's a promise if ever there was
prices
one.
at 20 quid a net. I will not be back.
Kev will be listening to this, like rubbing his hands together.
But it's quite bad. It really is. It's not offensive, but it's
I wouldn't
mild.
say, no, it's not bad.
No, it's quite poor.
It's not bad, but I would say
It's not offensive. It's mildly. It's just disappointing.
It's kind of dull.
If anyone can
It's
tell
just
us
a
what's...
bit.
It's a bit.
It ruined a ginger ale.
Yeah.
But the Hague is bloody good.
Well,
So this is a back to front whiskey. This is not one where somebody's going to object to you ruining the whiskey with ginger ale.
No, that's
You're going to
not
object to ruin your fever tree.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now,
Well,
as it is,
As is custom.
as is custom on the Whisky Stories podcast, Stuart, we do ask all our guests for their what 3 drams, any 3 drams, as long as they've got some sort of meaning or story or something behind them. Through your journey and what we've talked about here, I've been quite interested and excited to hear, what are your 3 drams tonight?
So mine are, I think, given what we've talked about, predictably down to earth, and I think Ross certainly can guess what my first one's going to be, which is
Old Smuggler.
Yeah, see, if Old Smuggler had been my first dram, I don't think I'd have got into the whiskey industry. I think that'd have been me done. That would have it. My first is Monkey Shoulder.
Great dram.
It's do you know? I think it was the first. It was the first whiskey that I properly enjoyed. And it was really before I properly started getting into whiskey. But I was at a friend of my parents' house, weirdly, and he had bought the Monkey Shoulder, and I just was not a whiskey person at all. This guy was raving about it. I had a try of it, and there was this kind of real lovely banana note that I really enjoyed. I'd always found, prior to that, I'd always found whiskey overwhelming. It was too much flavour, too big. So Monkey Shoulder is going to be my first one.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things about me and whiskey is that actually, a bit like Kev here, it's a relatively recent thing. So it was my wife really that started getting me into whiskey. She has been a whiskey drinker long before I started getting into whiskey. So that's my first one, and that's the one I recommend regularly on TikTok. My second whiskey is one that I think, whilst Monkey Shoulder was the first one I enjoyed, this was the first one where I got it. Okay. Where I understood whiskey can be complex, there's a lot going on, and it's Balvenie Caribbean cask.
Okay, not the first time that's been on, actually.
No,
that's been
14,
that's been mentioned before.
And so one of the things that when I was working at the hotel, one of the things I started doing was every shift, I would take in a wee sample bottle and I would buy a dram from the bar with staff discount, and I'd take it home and I would sit and I would taste it, and I would usually pull up the master malt tasting notes, and this was my method of trying to kind of dial in my palate.
Yeah.
I'd see what they're saying it's supposed to taste like, and see if I could pick out those things. And Balvenie Caribbean cask was, I think, the first whiskey where I was like, okay, I get this, and I just absolutely love it.
Brilliant.
And so it was a real gateway whiskey to me. And so I therefore still absolutely love a rum cask. Any kind of rum cask whiskey is something I absolutely adore.
Lovely.
And my third one, and this is one which has a little bit more story to it and a bit more kind of whiskey industry. This was while I was working at Tomatin, and one of my colleagues she had worked at Kilhoman. So she had been essentially a supervisor at Kilhoman, and she'd moved over and she was working at Tomatin, and she gave me I think it was like a half bottle of Kilhoman Lochgorm. Oh. And that was my first introduction to, that I really enjoyed, big peatiness and big sherry, and that one was kind of one where I went, okay, this is what big peat, big sherry can be. Yeah. And so I mean, since then I've been a massive fan of Kilhoman. Kilhoman Sanig is one that I have on the shelf kind of all the time, because Lochgorm is limited. If it wasn't so limited, I would probably be Lochgorm. So those are my three. Brilliant. And they all kind of build my whiskey story of where I've got to. And Lochgorm's really the only one that's not a kind of a standard release. But all sensible priced, nothing crazy. I mean, a bit, like you guys, I've had the opportunity in the last couple of years to try some incredible old drams. And they're amazing. But I think for me, it's about the stories. It's about the stuff that kind of brought you to whiskey.
No, you're absolutely spot on, and they are three. They are, great drams as well. And as I say, I'm just looking back there. The Balvenie Caribbean cask has popped up a couple of times. Any hazard? Can anyone remember anyone?
That's hard.
Anyone remember where?
I was going to say Kilhoman Sanig more than Lochgorm for me, but Sanig would, if it wasn't my work 3 drams, it would be in the top 5 for me.
That's amazing. It's a great
Caribbean cask. Who said Caribbean cask?
For me, part of the kind of getting into whiskey, Sanig was just big for me.
Do you know what actually popped up back-to-back weeks in the lost episodes?
Mike Brown and
Mike Brown and Liv,
Whisky Liv.
Yeah, Olivia Patterson, both of them picked it up. I'm just looking back here, 12, 14, yeah.
So it's ended two unreleased launch episodes.
No, but there's been other ones as well. But I mean, to be honest, like my brother-in-law over in India, he doesn't like whiskey or doesn't drink whiskey. But when I was coming over to actually meet him for the very first time, I sort of thought I'll buy a nice bottle of whiskey for him, and so like, he's a rum drinker, so I thought it was an easy go-to, and I think for that it is, like you say, with the monkey shoulder as well in particular, it's a great entry level whiskey. But when you say entry level, I think a lot of people in whiskey can maybe sort of turn their nose up and be like, oh well, it's probably not as complex as I would like. But when you look at it, that is a massive, it's a William Grant & Sons, but it's also what's in that. From a single malt perspective, it's a malt blend. When you look at that,
like Balvenie 12 is not the most complex whiskey I've ever tasted, but it's the whiskey that makes me happiest.
100%.
I think it's
Old Smuggler for me, to be perfectly honest. Old Smuggler, it's not very complex, but made me happy tonight.
There's a couple of people you've had on who've talked about that kind of journey where you start off with the kind of relatively everyday whiskey that's kind of supermarket, and you graduate into the big peat or the big sherry, and then you find your way back to it, and that's exactly what happens with these for me. Is I kind of went into the bigger peaties or the bigger sherries, and then at some point, I think it was Cody particularly was talking about it, you come back to those early whiskies that you thought at the time, okay, there's not that much going on, because you tried a massive sherry bomb, and you go back to them and you go, actually, there's a lot more here than I thought.
Old blends are the perfect example.
Absolutely.
Somebody tells you you're drinking a 70s dimple, you'd think the way it was marketed, the way it was designed to be a certain way. I'm now getting brulee from this. It's a belter of a dram. If people are looking to...
That's absolutely excellent.
If people are looking to get in contact with you... That's a real discovery,
that dimple.
Yeah, how do I find you?
How do we find you?
So I am at Mossburn_Stewart on
How do you spell
Insta.
your Stewart?
I spell it EW.
You see. You have to be careful. It could be a Mossburn Stewart who spells it with
and I'm also at Dramdabbler on both Insta and on TikTok, mostly TikTok.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And of course, as ever, if anyone wanted to sort of keep up with us, we are at the Whisky Stories on Instagram, and of course you'll get a wee update on the Whisky Club Facebook page as well. Stuart, it's been absolutely fantastic having you here. Thank you so much. I might try and, is it tomorrow you're up at tomorrow as we're recording this, it's Monday the 15th, so Tuesday you're up at Drinkmonger.
Yeah, I'm at Drinkmonger tomorrow night. So to give the guys a shout if you fancy coming along.
If
Thanks
Ivan's
so much
working, we're trying to get Ivan's going to be coming on from Drinkmonger. He was
nice.
I was up there a couple of weeks ago there, so we're going to get Ivan on.
Excellent.
Nice.
South American, great guy.
Thanks for having me on, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Cheers.
We're going to finish this dimple pinch tonight. Cheers guys, all the best. Thanks for coming on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.